Welcome in, everybody, to a special night edition of Birds 365 here Tuesday night, August 6th, day 9 of training camp officially in the books. After today, as Johnny Mac said before we came on the air tonight, a hot one today down at the NovaCare Complex, 98-minute long practice. Johnny Mac, the depth chart came out, 9th practice in the heat. A lot to talk about tonight on this Tuesday edition of Birds 365. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. Big day for me, the Eagles depth chart. I'm very excited by it. Way too excited.
You were fired up pre-show, Johnny Mac. I haven't seen that in a little bit.
Only because they finally changed the depth chart to explain how they play defense. So by that, I mean the nonsensical, who anybody who watches this show, 3-4 versus 4-3 bullshit can finally be buried. There are 2 edge players, 3 interior players listed for their 5-man front, 2 linebackers, and then the defensive backfield with the nickel. So I'm very excited. The Eagles have finally done it. When I saw the word edge on the depth chart, I was thrilled to no end.
Johnny Mac fired up about the depth chart coming out. If you remember, as John talks about the 4-3 and the 3-4, we had a tremendous breakdown over the summer on what John meant, or what the defense means, how it's not a 4-3 or a 3-4, and there's a lot more nuance to it than that. If you haven't caught that, I highly recommend searching YouTube after the show for John McMullen's masterclass, because that was tremendous. But, you know, when you say that, it brings me back to that conversation. Before we get into day 9, then, John, let's start on the depth chart. What stood out on the depth chart to you outside of the 5 linemen listed?
Well, outside, that's the best part, because I consider that a win to finally. They've been playing this way for 4 years. This will be the 4th year. So to finally have something that identifies it properly, I think that'll help a lot of people. But beyond that, yeah, I mean, I always, it's put together by the Eagles PR department, not the coaching staff. So it's not set in stone when it comes to guys and where they are on the depth chart. But there were some strange slash sort of battles. College teams do that a lot when guys are running neck and neck. You'll see the slash on their depth charts. The Eagles used a slash at middle linebacker between Devin White and Nakobe Dean, which has not been the case in training camp. Devin's taken every single first team rep to start practice. Zach Vaughn, same thing at will linebacker, with Jeremiah Trotter Jr., which was that one's flat out strange. Yeah. Because Nakobe's taken a bunch of first team reps and he mixes in. Trott has gotten a few, but not many. And Zach Vaughn's gotten a ton. So why that's a slash, I have no idea. And then Isaiah Rodgers at right corner with Kaylee Ringo. That also is a slash, but it seems certainly over recent days, Rodgers has taken a lead there. Avonte Maddox is still the first team slot, according to the depth chart, whereas Quinyon Mitchell has seemingly overtaken him. They still have Quinyon Mitchell as the backup to Darius Slay at left corner. So there's some things you look at and you go, Tyler Steen's still the right guard.
Yes.
Now he was back working some second team drills. Mekhi Becton was with the first team. So I think that's kind of shifted a little bit. Paris Campbell still leading in the slot as the third receiver. But he's been out for a couple of days with a groin injury, and who knows how long that's going to linger. And it seems like everybody from Nick Sirianni to Aaron Moorhead to Kellen Moore today have started to talk about piecemealing that third receiver role. If you need a true slot receiver, maybe it's Britton Covey. If you need a red zone threat, maybe it's Johnny Wilson. If you need somebody to stretch the field, maybe it's John Ross. If he needs yards after catch, maybe it's Paris Campbell when he gets healthy again. But they're starting to talk about piecemealing it. And so those were the interesting takeaways from where I saw it. Everything else is as expected or where you would think it would be. But the linebackers specifically, there's been no comment. We talk about that back and forth that was going on between Isaiah Rodgers and Kaylee Ringo. It's now 6'3" Rodgers, so he's starting to take a pretty significant lead. White and Vaughn have been there all 9 practices as the starting.
Yeah, and they got them split. I mean, why?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll talk.
And the other thing that's interesting about the linebackers when I'm looking at the depth chart is, so technically the way the Eagles listed here, now maybe that's technically, it might not be exactly how it is, but technically Devin White would be the one keeping Nakobe Dean off the field, not Zach Bond. Is that right, or is that just how it's listed?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interchangeable in that both Bick and Bobby King have mentioned that the inside linebackers coach, they want the guys to be interchangeable. So often when Nakobe takes first team reps, they're with Devin White in place of Zach Bond. So he's capable. That's hard to do. Again, it's done by the PR department. They're not going to list, Quinyon Mitchell. They listed him at left corner essentially. They don't designate it at left corner, but that's where Darius plays. That's where Slay plays. And that's where they put his position. Well, he's played there as the backup to Slay. He's played nickel. He's played dime. He's played right corner. So you're not going to put him at all 4 of those positions. They don't obviously even designate a dime player. So it is what it is, but it gives you sort of a template of where guys are for the most part. But yeah, the linebackers were by far the most interesting. And I've said it, maybe they listen to this show too much because I've said it pretty consistently. The difference between Devin White and Zach Bond and Ben Van Sumer and Oren Burks, if he ever gets on the field again, is minimal. And Nakobe and Trot in between, it's minimal. So, maybe they listen to this.
John? How's Trotter looking out there? I mean, you say there's not much difference, which is a bad thing. But when you talk about Trotter,
I don't know if it is a bad thing.
He's a 5th round rookie, though. I mean, does he look as good or comparable to the guys in front of him? Because I think if that's the case, that's at least to look for a silver lining. That's good to hear on Jeremiah Trotter Jr.
Well, from my standpoint, he hasn't played enough to say he can play at the level of Devin White and Zach Bond. But my presumption is that if you were forced to play him, it wouldn't be that different. So that's when I say that, that's what I'm talking about. He hasn't gotten enough first team reps to make any concrete decisions on him, but I mentioned he's a lot like Nakobe. He's undersized. He's not the best athlete from an NFL standard, like a Devin White type standard, or even a Ben Van Sumeren standard from an athleticism standpoint. Undersized, but very instinctive. So I look at those 2 players, and I've mentioned it before. There's a little bit of a redundancy to their skill sets. But yeah, I don't, and you said it was a bad thing. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think they got a bunch of good backup linebackers.
John, it's kind of a bad thing. If you have 6 or 4 or 5, whatever you want to call it, guys that are interchangeable, but there's no one that's going to make a difference at the linebacker position or make you
that's negative. But anybody who thinks they're getting difference makers at linebacker for the contracts that they handed out is nuts to begin with. So, I can't pay any mind to those people. You can cross your fingers and Hope ain't a strategy, is how he always says. It's not a strategy. There are no difference makers at linebacker. Yes, that's not going to change.
You at least want to know that your team has a starting linebacker.
Well, it was Nick Morrow a starting level linebacker?
Yeah, and how'd that work, John? How'd that work out?
I would say he was, but people weren't accepting of it. People weren't accepting of TJ Edwards.
So that's not true. He was.
I've done this show. I've done this show for
John. People liked those linebackers.
I've done in hindsight. I can't tell you how much time doing this show with Jody over that span. I would get shit for saying TJ Edwards is a really, really good linebacker. There were so many. In hindsight, after they went where they went, and now they went in a different direction and it got worse, then people say that kind of changed. So I'm talking about in the moment, they weren't happy with it because he didn't make a lot of splash plays. So it's one of those things where, and maybe Devin White provides that because he's always been a guy who's, maybe out of his gap 3 or 4 times, but he makes a splash play. And if you win a game and you see a linebacker make a splash play, maybe that satisfies some people. But if you're looking for consistency from down to down, he's probably not the guy you're looking for. There's something to being a home run hitter. CJ is a lot like that at safety. He's not going to be in the right place every single time. That's Reed's job. But he might hit a home run.
Yeah, it's true.
And chicks dig the long ball, as they say.
Absolutely, J-Mac.
And everybody else digs the long ball as well. So, people like big plays and splash plays, and it's understandable.
Well, what about just from a competency standpoint at the position? I mean, you are right. If they're competent, then it's a great problem that you have 4 or 5 guys that are interchangeable. But if they're all subpar, then that's when I think it becomes an issue. Do they at least look like they're par for the course? I'm not asking for difference makers. I get it. We don't have them. We're not going to have them. It's not Howie's philosophy. But what about competent? What about middle of the pack? What about not a complete 100% liability on the defense?
Well, that's the reason I bring up last year. Like, nobody thinks Nick Morrow and Zach Cunningham were middle of the pack, but they were probably middle of the pack. So can they be that level? Sure. And a bunch of them, they much better depth this year, I would say. And that's what I kind of mean by, I think they have better depth. And they got a bunch of Nick Morrows and Zach Cunninghams, with one potential exception that's going to occasionally make the splash play that people want, but he's also going to make a shit ton of mistakes, unfortunately. At least that's his history. And you can hope. There's nothing wrong with hope.
Yeah.
But hope is not a strategy. I'm looking him up. Nick Morrow was 36th of 82 last year of linebackers.
He was that high.
Yeah. Well, because he had a bunch of good games.
Yeah, he had that 3 sack game. I remember that. I remember being in the green room with Seth Joyner at that time, and he's like, Nick Morrow with 3 sacks. What the heck is going on? It was pretty funny.
Well, yeah, I mean, he wasn't responsible for those 3 sacks, but people love the 3 sacks.
Yeah, they sure do.
It had more to do with defensive front, getting him in a position to make some, clean up some plays, so to speak. But yeah, is he good enough? I would say most people don't believe that. But he was good, as you mentioned, overall when compared to the rest of the league. He was a good run defender, was a good pass rusher, was pretty poor in coverage. I think they if you look at Nakobe, I think he's going to be a pretty good run defender. When we get to practice today, they were doing a bunch of blitzing. It was a situational practice where they were working on blitzing defensively. I think Nakobe is a good blitzer for a linebacker, for an inside linebacker. He's terrible in coverage.
Well, I want to go to the super chat here because it's directly about what you're talking about. And James Carver, who drops the super chat, I'll bring it up in just a second. One question, real quick, John. Is this officially the initial depth chart that the Eagles have released? Is that what you would call it, the initial first depth chart?
Yes. Obviously, the opening preseason game is Friday in Baltimore. And yes, this is the first depth chart released by the Eagles.
Didn't that used to be one of your pet peeves where people would say or is that at the end of camp when they released the depth chart and you're like, it's not the final depth? It wasn't that one of your pet peeves?
No, well, the final roster cut is one of my pet peeves.
Okay, that's
it's the initial roster cut. It's the initial roster cut to 53 because there's so much movement. So that's one of my pet peeves. The final roster. Now the depth chart. There's no pet peeve. I mean, everybody releases depth chart and this was a league-wide problem, not just an Eagles problem. They kept a standard template for so long, which was 4-3 or 3-4. And I've always thought that created a lot of, lack of whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, lack of understanding. Yeah, 100%.
Lack of understanding. I don't think they educated their fan base as well by relying on those templates that were out of style. You hear Vic talk about it all the time. There's not 3 linebackers on the field anymore. Never. And maybe it's 10 times a year in goal line situations. Even less than that, really, because you're really going to put more defensive front people on the line of scrimmage. Hassan Reddick, Jody and I would talk about this all the time. I love Jody. He's an old school guy.
Yeah.
Hassan Reddick's not an outside linebacker. He's an edge rusher.
Well, didn't Vic kind of use that word too?
Yeah. And maybe this is Vic. I joke it's me. It's not me.
It's the old school.
I don't have the cachet to pull that off with the Eagles. But I bet you Vic set them down and said, this is stupid. We have edge rushers. We have 4-eye techniques. We have a nose tackle. And Vic is an old school guy, but even him as an old school guy, and I'm an old school guy. But that doesn't mean we have to say something doesn't exist. So Hassan Reddick was an edge rusher. Josh Sweat's an edge rusher. He was talking, a lot of people called Bryce Huff a defensive end. He's an edge rusher. That's what Vic said.
Yeah. No, you're right.
So whether you want to call that outside linebacker, knock yourself out. They're edge rushers. Jonathan Gannon would call them overhang players. Overhang the line of scrimmage. Whereas off-ball linebacker, stacked linebacker, just as it says, they're stacked or they're off the ball behind defensive front people. And there's only 2 of them on the field, sometimes 1 of them. So when people say 4-3, well, there ain't 3 linebackers on the field. Right. So why are you talking about a 4-3? Anyway, I don't want to get bogged down.
That's right. We'll get our super chat here. For anybody just checking in, we're recapping the first Eagles depth chart that they put out. Obviously, they have their preseason game on Friday versus the Baltimore Ravens. So they put it out today. Johnny Mack loved it because they properly put out there the way their defense works. And John loves that. So that's good stuff. I want to go back to one of our topics that we were just hitting on. We got a super chat from James Carver. But first, I got to hit this. We talked about hope on the linebackers. Andre says, hopes. My pop used to tell me hope in one hand, shit in the other. See what you feel faster. Good stuff. Good stuff.
He's right. Well, that's the point.
He is absolutely right. But, we'll see what Devin White, Nakobe Dean, Zach Bond, and Trotter can bring to this team. We will say, and we will hope, I guess you could say, that they will be competent. Let's go to James Carver, super chat, talking about the linebacker position. We just got into it. This is a good question, John. James Carver drops a $19.99 super chat. Thank you, brother. All super chats go to the front here on JAKIB Sports, so we appreciate that. and the financial support of the channel is appreciated. J Mac, from the discussion so far, it sounds like Zach should be the Mike, while White and Dean should be battling for Will because of their run and blitz strengths, and White being in lead because he can cover, which Vic prioritizes. It's kind of a good point. I mean, if you said, we talked about this morning on our Football 24/7, where Bond has kind of been the best coverage linebacker. So does James Carver have a good point here, John, or is there a good reason to dispute this?
Well, I don't know if he's, he's not Derek Brooks. I mean, there are no Brian Urlachers out there. He showed some nice instincts when he blew up a screen the other day. But I mean, when it comes down the field, carrying a tight end deep down the field, yeah, I don't know if he can do that. He's been an edge rusher. The Eagles are turning him into an off-ball linebacker. He spent most of his time on the edge with New Orleans. So, yeah, I'm not ready to say that he's their best coverage linebacker. He's just had some nice moments at camp. I think the Eagles think Devin White is because of his athleticism.
Yeah, right.
I mean, and he has,
the one thing I'll point to with Devin is that you said he did stick with Saquon a couple times on those wheel routes. I don't know what that means or if it's not, but that is an instance.
Yeah, in the spring, he never left his hip. And I thought, and I said, and he's also done it in training camp as well. But again, you have to be careful with practice because, and even in a game, maybe the design of the play is just for Saquon to take Devin White out of, and he's not trying to ramp up and trying to get, because he might be the fourth or fifth option in the passing game. In other words, he's just clearing out and trying to create space for the other guys. So you have to be careful. But I definitely think they believe that Devin White is their best coverage linebacker because of his athleticism. And look, that's helpful. I mean, I just mentioned two of the best ever, Derek Brooks and Brian Urlacher. A big part of it was they were tremendous athletes and they could carry running backs down the field. They could carry tight ends down the field because of that athleticism. But it takes far more than just athleticism. And James Carver's an SEC guy. And I bring up Dontavius Thomas from Auburn, who was a phenomenal athlete. Couldn't cover me with a strained calf. Just had no feel for it. So it's no guarantee of anything, but it is helpful when it connects, when you have somebody like Derek Brooks with that kind of athleticism and football IQ meshed together, you have a Hall of Famer. Same thing with Brian Urlacher. Then you have a Hall of Famer. Eagles don't have that, to put it mildly.
Yeah, no doubt about it. John, good answer to James Carver there. For those just checking in, got a lot of good people in the chat. Appreciate each and every one of you for being here. Make sure you guys drop a like on the show, as it's the best thing you can do to help us grow. So we appreciate all of you. Any channel members will be entered into our Saquon Barkley jersey giveaway all year long. So if you're not a member, consider becoming a member today. I want to get to the breakdown from practice today. Sorry, brain fart there. SMD says, did we get an update on CJ Gardner-Johnson? SMD, you didn't miss it. It's coming up. Me and John right now, we're recapping that initial depth chart that the Eagles released today. So that's where we are. We're recapping kind of where they went with linebackers. I have a couple more questions on the depth chart. Then we'll hit a timeout, and we will get into all the updates that came out of day number 9 of practice today. The injury updates, Tyler Steen, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Mekhi Becton, the right guard, the cornerbacks, the linebackers, you name it. We will get into it. So that is coming up soon here on Birds 365. John, one other thing, a couple other things on the depth chart here that I want to hit on. What do you think of how they put the nickel cornerback there? They put Avonte Maddox. I thought, I think it makes sense. He's your best player when he's healthy, I think, at that position. I was just wondering maybe if they tried to move one of put Quinion there, or maybe even they haven't put Isaiah
Well,
Rodgers.
I brought that up. I mean,
yeah,
Quinion in recent days, I kind of mentioned they're not going to put him. He's played everywhere. They're not going to. They put him in left corner because that's where he's gotten. He started as the backup to Slay, but he's also played. He's taken more first team reps than Avonte Maddox recently in the nickel. He's played right corner as well, and he's played dime. So he's played every position at corner Ken in this defense. But they only have that's what they're not going to list them at 4 different spots. That's not what they do with these depth charts. So yeah, that's where you take it with a grain of salt, and it's the communications department. It's not the coaching staff who puts this together. I asked Vic purposefully that yesterday. I said, when Cooper DeJean does come back, does that sort of shift the philosophy when it comes to the reps of Quinion Mitchell? He knew what I was talking about. I didn't mention Quinion by name, but a lot of the reason the Eagles moved him and tried him out in the slot is because Cooper is not healthy. I think Cooper would have gotten those reps had he not hurt his hamstring before camp began. So does that change when he's back? And Vic said, maybe, which to me says probably. And he mentioned he's probably going to be on a pitch count. He's got to get clearance about how much he can work and all that kind of good stuff from the medical staff and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, and Vic said this as well, you don't draft a cornerback in the first round to play him in the slot. Ultimately, Quinion Mitchell is going to play outside. It's just a matter of when. And when they get to it, it seems like they want to get their best 3. What they think their best 3 is on the field against Green Bay, which is a very explosive team, tremendous offense, rising young quarterback. They got a boatload of young receivers who are all playmakers. And they want to get their best players on the field. I've said I would play Quinion outside. And that's the way I would go. To me, it would be easy on week 1. To me, it would be Slay and Mitchell outside and Avonte in the slot. And then you make do to when Cooper is ready, whenever that might be, whatever he's sped up to get him on the field. But Vic's going in a different way. It looks like it's going to be Slay, Rodgers, and Mitchell at this stage. But we got a long way to go still. It's August. It's getting late. Preseason starts. You're probably going to have more injuries, unfortunately. A lot of things can happen. But right now, if the game was this weekend, instead of Baltimore in the preseason, it would be Slay and Rodgers outside. Mitchell would be the slot corner, but long way to go.
What do you think then of Avonte Maddox at the slot? And look, I get it. I like Avonte, but here's what I would say. I think that, might throw people for a loop, even people who've been watching this show all summer long. Crawley checks in and he says, I find it hard to believe Maddox is starting in the slot. And I think the reason Crawley would say that would be, John, we've talked about the cornerbacks maybe more than every position group on this team for the last 8, 9, 10 weeks since the NFL draft. We haven't mentioned Avonte Maddox that much. And now he's going to be
he's been playing mostly safety ever since.
Right. And that's what I mean. Now he's at the slot. Do you like that move? Do you think that's the right move to put Avonte Maddox at the slot?
Well, nobody's saying they made that move.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, that's where they slotted.
I mean, I'm saying if I were starting week 1 and I didn't have Cooper DeJean available for, reasons, that's the way I would go, because he knows how to play the position. He's a veteran. He's savvy. If he's healthy, he's a good player. And then, Mitchell's where you want to go outside anyway. So I've been very consistent with that. And the fact that you look at what Kansas City did a couple of years ago with their good young corners, and they said, all right, let's get it over with. Let's get the hiccups over. Let's throw him in the deep end of the pool, and maybe he got something really special by the second half of the season, which is kind of what happened to them. And that would be my template. Any young corner is going to struggle at times, and Mitchell's going to struggle at times. Rogers is going to struggle at times. Ringo's going to struggle at times, no matter who it is. It's just the nature of it. So that's the way I would go. And, it was interesting that Bick was, well, it's not interesting that Bick is honest because he's always honest.
Yeah.
And he said, look, you don't take a cornerback in the first round to not have him play corner. But what he meant by that is, in the coach's mind, there are two different positions. There's cornerback, which is outside cornerback, and there's slot. And the fact that he's versatile enough to play the slot is great, but he's going to be playing corner outside the numbers. So let's go. Let's get it started from my perspective.
Yeah, so we'll see what ends up happening there. The Maddox thing, I think, is just interesting. I don't know. Quignon's been playing a lot of slot. There's been other people rotating there. I'm not sure if they've looked better than Avonte has. It doesn't sound like you've got much of a sample size of Avonte Maddox.
No, he's played. The first, I mean, I have to go back. We've gotten so deep. The first 3 days, I would say, Avonte was taking all the first team reps at slot.
So has he looked better than the potential other players like Quinyon Mitchell, who's played in the slot as well?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think from the perspective of Quinyon's just learning the position. I think the enticing thing about Quinyon is the athleticism and some of the reasons he was taken number 22 overall, his ball skills, his ability to play off man match coverage. It's just a natural player, and he's got a tremendous ceiling as a player. So, I mean, but if you're talking about, and again, that's when we say, if you're talking about a guy who knows how to play, Avonte knows how to play the position. One of the things that Quinyon made a big play in run support yesterday, like that's a big part of playing slot corner that Avonte's really good at. Like run fits become a huge thing inside when you're playing slot. And most outside corners are terrible at it. So Quinyon's showing some enticing signs for that. But they got Tyler Hall. They got Perry Nickerson even is getting reps because Bick likes him inside. And a lot of it is, he's trying to find the backup safeties. And I think the belief is that, James is playing well at safety. And it doesn't surprise me at all, James Bradbury. And already you're starting to hear those rumblings of, hey, the Eagles are pretty stinking impressed with, one of the national NFL guys were in today, and the Eagles are telling him James is playing really good at safety. Now, it's partially true. He looks like a natural because he knows how to play. I say it all the time. The longer you let Vic see him, the more he's going to want to play him. I've said that from minute one.
James. I'm good with it. I'm good if they decide to keep James Bradbury here. I like him.
It's a lot of money to pay it back, but whatever.
Yeah, but he's under contract. I mean,
Yeah, he's already under contract. He doesn't play special teams, but you don't have really other options. I mean, they obviously don't like Tristan McCullum and Mekhi Gardner that much because they don't mind giving reps to James Bradbury and Avonte Maddox. So that tells me a lot about those two players. But, part of that might be they're trying to pump up Bradbury to trade him as well. So you have to throw that into the equation. But I guarantee Vic likes him. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
And then CJ hurt his shoulder. It's not serious, so no concerns. He was out there today watching practice. Funny moment, Nick Sirianni had the bullhorn yelling out situations, and his daughter was there and he's trying to get her attention. So he used the bullhorn and she wouldn't pay attention. And then CJ grabbed it to try to get her attention. So he's fine. But he didn't practice today. And it was Reed Blankenship and Avonte Maddox, and then James kind of mixed in from there with getting some first team reps as well. So, you know, they have more young cornerbacks that they like than young safeties, with the exception of Sidney Brown, who obviously is not back yet, but will be back relatively early in the season. So you have to factor that in as well.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, I think they're balancing, obviously, whether even if someone's incrementally or a little bit better than Quinyon, they want to get him on the field. So there's a big balancing act here. We'll see what the Eagles end up doing at cornerback, slot cornerback, safety, James Bradbury, the whole 9 yards. We'll get into all that as the show goes on. I'm going to welcome everybody in. A lot of good people in here. Cody K checking in. What's up, Cody? Appreciate you being there, brother. Richard Nutt checks in. Jack Straw. A bunch of people in here. JM, I see you in here, brother. Appreciate everybody being in here right now. Kyle Kokorski's in here. Regal Eagle. A lot of good people. Make sure you guys like the show. Right now, Johnny Mac and I are getting into the first depth chart the Eagles released before their game coming up on Friday. So we have not fully dove into day 9 of training camp yet. We will get there after our first time out. John, any other thing on the depth chart that we must talk about to inform the listeners on Birds 365?
Well, Tyler Steen was interesting because he missed just over a week. He was back yesterday. He was back in team drills today, but he was the second team right guard behind Mekhi Becton. So, I've talked about that. It affects it. If you look at the depth chart, Mekhi is listed as the second team right guard, and they signed him to be the swing tackle. So already there's that. Now, also understand when you get down to the 53, then you start cross training. When you get closer, when you start thinking about it. Right now, they got 100 offensive linemen. So, everybody's got a backup. Jordan Mailata, they list Fred Johnson. Well, Fred also plays right tackle. Landon Dickerson, it's Trevor Keegan. He's played right guard as well. Cam Jurgens, it's Matt Hennessy. Brett Toth has been the backup center in recent days with Dylan McMahon. Right now, Matt Hennessy would be the 4th-string center, but he's taken second team right guard snaps at times, sometimes third team. I told you right guard with Tyler Steen, Mekhi Becton. Right tackle, they list Darian Kennard. Fred, Lane Johnson was back at practice and team drills today. He didn't do team drills on Monday. He just did individual work. And Fred Johnson stood in, not Darian Kennard. So, again, this is not etched in stone. It is done by the PR department, not the coaching staff. So it's not perfect, but it's a good indication of where players at certain positions are. Johnny Wilson is A.J. Brown's backup. He has made that leap early in camp.
We've been looking for the guy who, look, you never want to talk about injuries, but we've talked about the Grand Canyon type of drop, and if one of those guys goes down. So I'm not saying Johnny Wilson's anything close, but maybe you found at least your option on the outside as a backup wide receiver, which is a positive thing. Whether he's, how good he is still up to be, left to be determined. But
yeah, well, I mean, that has more. The Grand Canyon drop there, like that's an interesting dichotomy. We talked about the linebackers. So if you want to say Devin White is number 1 and Warren Burks now because of the injury is number 6, that's like a hole in the backyard. AJ to Johnny Wilson is still the Grand Canyon. It's just maybe not the deepest part of the Grand Canyon anymore.
It's like a step stool at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
Maybe not the deepest part. Maybe not quite, but yeah, it's still pretty huge. But that has a lot to do with how great AJ and Devontae are. You don't have a great player at linebacker.
Yeah, good stuff, Johnny Mac. Good breakdown of the initial depth chart here. We'll see how it changes. This isn't set in stone, everybody, so no need to overreact about anything. Just interesting to see how the Eagles view players in certain spots, you know, what they think of certain guys, and you get a little bit of a look inside of that when this comes out. So good stuff there. We're going to take our first commercial break. Coming up, we're going to dive into day 9, practice day 9. I see James Dogwin checks in. What's the update on DeJean and Sidney Brown? A couple questions on CJ Gardner-Johnson. We're going to get all the injury updates. We're going to get the day 9 updates. We're going to talk offense. We're going to talk defense. We're going to do it all next on Birds 365. Thank you all for being here tonight. A nighttime edition of Birds 365. A lot of good viewers in here tonight. Make sure you guys smash that like button. We'll be right back on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.